The woman who bankrupted the bankers and scared off the government and gangsters, the richest and greediest woman in the world. Someone said a long time ago, the ultimate wealth is the absence of greed. That is why greed is the root of all evil. It is probably hard not to agree with these words because, as Henrietta Green's story shows, you can have a huge fortune in your account but be a beggar at heart. And that, unfortunately, cannot be bought with any money. The woman in this story has gone down in history and even into the Guinness Book of Records as the world's greatest miser. This achievement has not been beaten by anyone so far. I think you'll be interested to know what led to the greed of the once richest woman in the world. Just trust me, the story will be long but interesting, as I have never personally encountered so many facts, absurdity, and at the same time, talent. Also, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now, back to the story. Henrietta was born in 1834 into a family who owned not a bad fortune at the time. The main Holland's source of income was the whaling industry. The girl's entire upbringing was the responsibility of her grandfather, Gideon Holland. Henrietta belonged to the Protestant religious group of Quakers, quite prevalent in the New England states at the time. Among the precepts of life were always self-restraint, unassuming food, and clothing. When old Gideon's eyesight began to fail, 7-year-old Henrietta would always climb on his lap and read with genuine interest the newspaper summaries of financial news, being able to understand the difference between stocks and bonds. That's how, at the age of 13, she became the family accountant and kept the books of a huge 6-0 business. Henrietta's life was not filled with childhood hobbies, but with stock news summaries. From the age of 13, she stopped being interested in anything other than numbers, stocks, bonds, the stock exchange, and more. It's worth noting that the girl was brilliant at what she did. A mathematical mind and an entrepreneurial spirit would soon make itself felt. At the age of 15, Henrietta dropped out of Boston High School because of her behavior, not even getting her diploma. She constantly provoked scandals with her peers and didn't understand the purpose of education. As she recalled later, "I just wasn't interested in them. I didn't know what to talk about." It often happened that the girl knew more than the teacher, and this also led to conflicts. Henrietta had learned to count phenomenally before school, better than any computer that would not appear after her death until 100 years later. And other fields of study did not interest the girl at all. It was then that she began to take an active part in her father and grandfather's business. The surprising thing was that despite her large family, no woman was allowed in the business, as it was believed that business was run by men and women were given the role of housewife. None other than Henrietta. From the age of 15, the girl took an active part in the family council, which was all male. Already, then she was earning as much money as the adult members of the family, keeping accounts, catching and selling fish, organizing her father's whaling expeditions, and even managing the construction of the docks. Can you imagine a girl of 15 doing these things on an equal footing with adults? At the same time, she could put up a fight with anyone she talked to. There were times when the workers didn't take her seriously, but after just 10 minutes of dialogue, they understood that Henrietta knew exactly what she was talking about. This was how she gained her first respectability. After her father's death in 1865, Henrietta inherited a substantial fortune of $7.5 million in cash. That's about $107 million in today's money. She was one of the most enviable brides, not only of Boston but of the whole state. Her father left the whaling business to his brothers, but Henrietta had no interest in it at all. She had no desire to get involved with it. She had other plans in her mind. Henrietta saw no prospect in the family business, as the popularity of whale oil, which was used for heating and lighting rooms and in industry, was affected by the advent of kerosene. On the one hand, technological advances saved the whale population, which was being decimated in huge numbers. On the other hand, the end of the family business. The young lady saw prospects only in the stock market. Later, the stock market became her vocation. She was adept at predicting changes in share prices and knew where to invest in order to make profit. Soon, many exchange members repeated her actions to earn, as all deals were always profitable. After several years of successful trading, Henrietta was nicknamed the Wall Street Witch for her incredible ability to predict the rise and fall of stocks and real estate prices. But there was a downside to all this success and wealth. Henrietta was very greedy. She liked to make money, and at the same time, she did not like to spend it at all. Henrietta made her first investment as a child when she opened a bank account and deposited every cent she saved on her purchases. One day in her youth, her father sent his daughter to New York for shopping and gave her $1,000 to buy clothes and ladies' things. What girl doesn't want to be beautiful and doesn't love fancy dresses? But the old man was very surprised when Henrietta returned in an old dress and stooped shoes while clutching tightly to her chest a bundle of papers. They were bank shares. Her daughter had invested all the money she had inherited from her father in Civil War bonds, 1861 to 1865, and was actively engaged in trading on the stock exchange. And when her aunt died in 1867, Henrietta was already 33 years old. She expected to receive her inheritance as her only niece. Disappointment struck on the day the will was read. Only $65,000, a year of the $2 million, was due to her. The rest went to charity and strangers. But the young lady wasn't going to put up with it. She forged a will that would have made everything hers and began a years-long legal battle. The examination did establish the fraud, and to avoid prosecution, she had to be married and go to London. Her husband became Edward Green. The Green family included congressmen and judges, and Edward's own uncle was the mayor of Boston. Edward himself, who spoke several languages, including Chinese, traveled halfway around the world. He stayed in the Philippines for 18 years, where he made a fortune in the silk, tea, and tobacco trade. The man was as much as 12 years older than the girl. Edward supported Henrietta when her father passed away, and 2 years later, Henrietta agreed to marry Edward Green. The couple legalized their relationship and sealed it with a marriage contract according to which Edward was not entitled to a cent of Henrietta's fortune. A family is a family, but the money goes separately. Even when her husband went bankrupt after a few years and got into debt, Henrietta did not help her husband, but simply drove him away. In her first year in the stock market, Henrietta's income was $1,250,000. All the money, which is roughly over $110 million these days, was used to buy bonds. She made only one mistake in all her business dealings: investing in the railroads. This was a promising line of business, but Green's interests intersected with a major competitor, Mr. Huntington, who could influence the state administration in addition to the money, so all the lawsuits over the purchased lots were lost. She never invested in the business again. In 1875, the statute of limitations on the forgery suit expired. Henrietta returned to the U.S. and continued her investment activities. The couple stayed in the cheapest room in the cheapest hotel they could find. The couple ran their business in parallel, not even crossing paths in the stock market or consulting with each other. Edward had his business, Henrietta had hers. The economic crisis of 1885 and mismanagement of capital bankrupted Mr. Green. Henrietta later found out that he had stolen her money and left her husband, after which she went to New York with the children. She invested all her money in the chemical bank and started a usury business. She even saved on her office rent. The bank provided her with a workplace, and she went there every day to borrow money secured by real estate. In this way, she ran her business in two priority areas: securities and mortgage lending, and Henrietta took only the most liquid real estate in metropolitan areas as collateral. These transactions resulted in the ownership of entire neighborhoods in Chicago, New York, and other major cities in the country. Investment activity peaked in 1907 during the stock market and banking panic. Securities had fallen in value. The country needed cash. Henrietta was buying up mortgages all over the country. Her fortune grew exponentially amidst the general panic. She carried out all settlements and transactions personally, as well as bilking unscrupulous borrowers out of debt. She never had a team, much less advisors. She did everything herself. No one can say how she did it and how she managed it all. She kept most of her assets in the refractory vault of the Chemical National Bank. Above the vault, in a corner of the common room, she had a table, and as a privileged depositor, she did not pay for it. Here, sitting on her own money, she welcomed visitors. She kept receipts and the money she received in payment of her debts in her many pockets sewn into the back of her long skirt. She did not keep any documentation, relying on her excellent memory and phenomenal ability to count verbally. To fill a debtor's bill that the deadline had passed, Henrietta was willing to walk to the farthest reaches of New York City. This happened often. At the same time, everyone in the city knew her, and even the most desperate criminals seeing Henrietta walking in an alleyway on the other side of the road in the evening would take off their hat and pay their respects. Even then, Henrietta was known not only on Wall Street, but all over America and even in the White House. She owned acres of land and over 8,000 properties in New York and Boston. The brokers knew that if Henrietta bought the company's stock, tomorrow the price of those securities would skyrocket. But it wasn't that simple. When buying securities, Henrietta spent a long period of time studying all the background information about the company and could tell even more about it than the owner. As for her lifestyle, it was even more complicated. Henrietta had 2 children from her marriage, Ned and Sylvia, who occasionally suffered from their mother's excessive thrift. It was even hard to imagine, but multimillionaire Henrietta Green, who owned over 1,000 flats, had no home, renting rooms in the cheapest motels and saving even on medicines and groceries. Henrietta hardly ever spent any money on clothes and shoes and only changed her underwear when the previous one had turned to rags. She never used the services of maids or laundresses. After reading the latest press, she would send her son Ned to sell the newspaper. At the shop, she could haggle for hours for every cent, something most salesmen hated Henrietta for. She never used hot water, for it was expensive at the time, and constantly wore only one black dress. The girl's stinginess began to show in her younger years. She used to switch off the light before the last guest left, put napkins with traces of recent use on the table, and the candles on the cake baked in honor of her birthday. She would take it back to the shop the next morning and demand her money back. Her stinginess robbed her son Ned of his leg. One frosty winter, Ned bought a sled. The boy couldn't believe his luck and immediately chose the steepest and most dangerous slides to ride on. During one of the slides, the sled overturned and the boy badly injured his leg. In a fit of frugality, Henrietta went to the Paupers Hospital for help. Unfortunately, the miser was well known by all. The doctors refused to help her son, so Henrietta decided to treat the boy at home. Ned suffered from terrible pain for several years, and then his leg was amputated above the knee. But these are not all the facts about Henrietta. The woman ate only oatmeal, occasionally allowing herself a treat, a piece of sugar cube. She brought oatmeal with her to work, and before lunch, she crossed the street to put the pot on the steam radiator in the office of a broker she knew to heat it up. She was drinking her oatmeal with tap water, claiming it was the tastiest drink she had never tasted in her life. She constantly smelled of dried onions, which she chewed incessantly for vitamins. The smell emanating from her was disgusting, just like her character. To save a cent is to earn it. That was our Henrietta's motto. In addition, she always existed with the fear of assassination, and to the rare acquaintances she came with her own food and even an egg boil burner. Once, she was licensed to carry a gun. She never parted with it again. The automobiles that appeared like a luxury item, Henrietta rejected, admonishing, Jesus Christ was satisfied to ride a donkey. It was in the moments of her morning passage to duty that the photographer's lens captured the unusual appearance of this woman. A black, deaf coat, a hat with a widow's veil, a wicked old woman's face, and a sharp, not at all senile gait. Whether it was this repulsive appearance or the persistent rumors of bizarre, extraordinary behavior that earned her the nickname of the Witch of Wall Street in the newspapers. Because of her fame, Henrietta was feared by everyone from the mayor of New York to any civil servant. She opened the door to any office, as they say, with her feet. She intimidated everyone, so much so that when they saw Henrietta, merchants would drop their prices just to get rid of her. People feared her because she was pushy and rude. Trust no one, a lesson her father taught her all her life. She was hated because she could fight tooth and nail and would wreak havoc on anyone who crossed her path. For her part, she hated someone too: doctors and tax collectors. Doctors and pharmacists, she believed, existed to prey on people's ailments. Deadly diseases could not be cured, and the rest would disappear naturally. Tax inspectors disgusted her to the point that she simply refused to see them. Avoiding them was helped by the nomadic lifestyle she led. Henrietta frequently changed flats, and when she moved to a new place, she sometimes even used a false name for the sake of secrecy. And when the deception was discovered, she would start looking for another place to live. In general, fame got ahead of the old woman. But if you think that's it, you're wrong. If Henrietta had to cross the Hudson, she'd walk a few extra miles to the freight ferry. It was cheaper there than on a passenger boat by a few cents. The story of the postage stamp is also interesting. She once spent half the night going around several post offices in search of that very stamp, necessarily not more expensive than 2 cents. When Henrietta passed away, her sister told the story. She had once brought her 2 children to her and asked her to look after them while she and her husband were traveling in Europe. How shocked she was when she returned 2 months later and found them skinny and hungry. Henrietta not only poorly fed them, she also put them to work in a neighbor's laundry to keep them busy. The boy was 8 years old and the girl was 10, and they worked 14 hours a day in the laundry. In the last years of her life, Henrietta was completely alone. Her ex-husband had died long ago, she had lost contact with relatives, and her son and married daughter hastened to live apart. The only person around was a little white dog, a creature that was small and unusually vicious. It barked all the time and tried to bite everyone it could reach with its teeth. But when the owner of the flat where she lived asked for an extra $2 for the doggie's trouble, she said no. She said, "I don't have that money." Green's famous quote, "Always buy cheap and sell expensively." This has become the key to success. This principle is the basis of successful business and is still applied by managers in many business sectors today. What made Henrietta's life unique was that on the scale of her business, she was on a par with Morgan and Rockefeller, but she did so in an era when women were excluded from business. The world's richest, greediest woman is gone at the age of 80, and she left the world of a stroke in another dispute over half a cent with a maid in 1916. Her fortune, which currently stood at about $4 billion, was divided equally between her son Ned and daughter Sylvia. Having inherited a fortune, Ned began to make up for lost time in his youth. He started buying yachts, cars, houses, and leading a beautiful lifestyle. He later became known by the nickname Uncle Ned. He invested most of his inheritance in cars and technological developments. In turn, her daughter Sylvia became a generous benefactor. Already in the 1920s, Henrietta Green became a household name in America. In 1934, director Charles Reisner directed the Hollywood film You Can't Buy Everything. Several biographies of Henrietta Green were published, and a museum named after her was established. She was listed as one of the richest people in the history of the United States, and among the 40 names of the coryphée of American capitalism, only one female, our heroine. Henrietta has made history and is remembered for her analytical mind as well as her ability to predict the financial ups and downs of national economies. But most of all, her name is associated with an ascetic lifestyle and simply enormous, even unimaginable greed. That's how the world's richest woman was. And what are your thoughts about this character? Be sure to write your opinion in the comments. That's all for today. Talk to you soon. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone who may find it interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.